there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking, and as always, great to have you along for another edition of Classic Fights. We've got another big one for you tonight. I'll bring in my co-host. We've got Grant Tassie Brown and the man on a mission around the world, Mike Altamura. How are we, guys? All good?
Good, Lyndon.
I'm great. I was waiting for Tassie to speak. Usually Tassie beats me to it. Yeah, I'm good, Lyndon. You know, they're all bums in Australia. None of them know anything. They don't know shit about boxing. I was waiting for that, but it just didn't come out today.
You sound like Muhammad Ali. Well, look, I'm pretty good, mate, because I kicked Peter Manias's ass again 5 straight in a row. You know, even though I was a tiebreaker, but I still beat Peter, and he took it okay, I think, but he might have went and smashed a couple of mirrors or windows after that, Lyndon. But he just can't beat me, can he?
He was very humble through gritted teeth, I think, was Pete. I don't think he was happy.
He just can't beat me. I've gone to another level. I think I'm in his head.
And he's not around this week again. So, I don't know what's happening there. But for you, Mike, this is your last week. You're off over gallivanting around the world again.
Yeah, travelling again this coming Saturday, which is exciting. Like I told you, I'll check in from the road and keep you posted. I know that you'll be covering some of what I'll be working on abroad on other programs you're associated with
100%.
Under the Boxing Deep Dive Network.
Yep.
But yeah, looking forward to getting back out there and being part of hopefully a few moments that are going to contribute positively to the history of the sport. So we'll see. Bit by bit.
It's good, Mike. You're making up for all you lost in COVID, all those, time you couldn't travel. So at least you're clocking the miles up again, mate. So it's good.
Yeah, well, we look forward to all the adventures of you, Mike, in the world of Pro Bellum these days. Obviously, big things happening there, and you're right, we will cover them on the show. And also my Monday night show, Talking Boxing as well. Plenty to talk about there as well.
And Mike, just before if any chance, Pro Bellum, you can perhaps sign the 2010 version of our friend, maybe Jason Medawar, our brother. We can sign him up, the 2010 version.
Look, we're covering a classic fight this week. I don't want to do a disservice to the legends by people who have actually seen their name pop up on this program be drawn into these discussions. So let's keep it on these two Hall of Famers.
Very well.
Are we going over the Nichols-Medawar fight, or is this the classic fight?
Well, I'm not sure that classifies as a classic fight, but we'll get into it because we've got plenty to go over. And Tassie, that was your choice again this week. Back to you. Comes around pretty quick, and I really love the fight you've got. I'll watch it again today. Who have you got?
I've got the great Roy Jones Jr. versus Lights Out James Tunney. So 2 undefeated guys, 2 Hall of Famers, 2 of the best ever, and they got it on. For James Tunney's IBF super middleweight champion. Roy jumped up from middleweight after he beat Bernard Hopkins, and mate, 2 of the greatest. Undefeated. Both went on to do great things after this fight, but I think this was a big turning point for I guess both their careers. But more so the victor.
It was an interesting one, wasn't it, Mike? Because with this fight, similar to Roy Jones's fight with Bernard Hopkins the year before, it was 2 Hall of Famers getting it on very, very early in their careers. And as Tassie said, after this fight, as good as the fight it was, both of them went on to even bigger and better things.
Roy Jones had a really underestimated run leading into this fight. Like you alluded to, the Bernard Hopkins fight, Bernard was just getting warmed up really in his professional journey. Roy beating him for the vacant world championship. But a couple other wins, really impressive wins that Roy had on the way up. He stopped Thulani Malinga, future WBC super middleweight world champion, stopped him in 6 rounds when, Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank, all of them struggled. Eventually Malinga would defeat Benn for the world championship, but they had struggled with him, and Roy Jones destroyed him in 6 rounds. Roy also shut out Jorge Castro, another future world champion as well, future middleweight world champion. At, like I said, future middleweight world champion and multiple-time challenger, light heavy, cruiserweight. But Roy had those wins, but none of them really were comparable in time to what TONEY had accomplished. Tony, of course, made his name upsetting Michael Nunn, the undefeated Michael Nunn, who many were touting as the next Sugar Ray Leonard, filling that role in the sport. And Tony absorbed an early storm, stopped him in the 11th round, had the 2 wars with Mike McCallum for a controversial draw. Most people felt Tony probably won the first bout, then a clear decision in their second contest, destroyed Iran Barkley, and leading into this bout, one of the most impressive performances of his career, which is a TKO 10 of Prince Charles Williams, the long-reigning IBF light heavyweight world champion who came down to challenge Tony. So a lot of the momentum was with Tony, but if you looked on Roy's side of the fence, kind of, like you said, slightly under the radar, the guys that he was ticking off was highly impressive. Even like leading into this bout, Roy knocked out Thomas Tate in 2 rounds. Thomas Tate would go on to have an outstanding career. Tate before that had pushed Julian Jackson to the absolute limit over 12 rounds, which is another fight that someday soon we might be reviewing in this program. So, you know, Thomas Tate was a high-level operator and Roy just made him look completely ordinary. So
2 rounds,
I think why I love this fight and its context in history is that both guys were in their absolute prime, but their primes would be extended considerably longer than what you would have imagined when they met here in 1994.
Hey, Mike, would you say they were in their prime, or would you say they were before their prime? I mean,
I still think prime. I think Roy was getting his due, but 1988 Olympian, 6 years into his career, I think it's the start of his prime, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that this fight going in, I don't want to spoil the outcome, but I think this fight going in had the opportunity to really make or break Roy, because there were still question marks as to where he stood in the sport, whereas Tony was a proven entity. Tony was on most people's pound-for-pound list, which is why he went into the bout as a slight favourite, and a lot of the boxing media were predicting a Tony victory.
Yeah, on that,
So,
Tassie, sorry, Tassie, I was just going to say for you, speaking of the pound-for-pound rating, at the time, the Ring magazine, James Toney was actually number 2, Jones was number 3, so very, very rare that you get...
Who was number 1?
Pernell Whitaker was number 1 at the time.
Oh, yeah.
No surprise there, but it's very, very rare.
What a top 3.
Yeah,
but
it's very, very rare to have the number 2 versus number 3, and we all know Ring magazine is the Bible of boxing as it is, but 2 versus 3, very, very rare for that to happen.
Yeah, 100%. Hey, Mike, so which version, so say if you're doing like a dream fight, what version of Roy and what version of James Toney separately would you pick? Would you have this Roy Jones? Would you have the Roy Jones at light heavyweight who unified the division? Which
I would have Roy Jones about 2 years down the track. Before the loss to Montel Griffin, the DQ loss, the Roy Jones that annihilated Murky Sosa and Bryant Brannon and Tony Thornton, Vinny Pazienza, those guys.
Eric Lucas, yep.
I would place with anyone in any era at that weight. Was he more proven, I guess, longer term over light heavyweight because he cleaned out the division at 168. He couldn't get the fights that he needed, but I think that's the best version of Roy. I think Tony's had so many incarnations, but I think the best version of Tony is probably about this time. Like, not saying necessarily this particular fight, but about this era, kind of that 92, 93, 94 on the right nights. I think Tony was at his best. He was such a great fighter that even, long past his prime, he was still able to defeat Vasily Girov for the cruiserweight world title.
But you have him as super middleweight, yeah? You have James as super
absolutely
middleweight if you're talking his career, yeah.
All right, guys, before we get into it a little bit more, into the fight, and we'll discuss a bit more, let's get into a little bit of the lead up to it. This is an interview just a month or so before they actually got in the ring.
160 to fight James at 168 pounds, where he has been living for the past year and a half, and a lot of people think that might be a mistake. What about the extra 8 pounds?
That lets you know that I evidently think that I'm a bad man. Anytime you can go to somebody's weight to where they've been living all this time and still know that you can take over them, that's got to let you know that you have a lot of confidence in yourself.
A lot of people seem to see this fight as a battle between your speed and James Toney's punching power. Some people, on the other hand, see it as a battle between your punching power and James's boxing ability. Are you, Roy, the boxer or the puncher in this fight?
I'm actually both, but that just goes to show you how well of a fight, how well of a matchup this really is. Because some people, like you say, look at my speed and his power. Other people look at my power and his speed. So there's two complete fighters that they're looking at, and that always creates a very big explosion.
How do you see that subject, James? Are you the boxer or are you the puncher against Roy Jones?
I'm both. I can do it all. Like I said, I'm a complete fighter. I can do it. I can box, I can punch, I can fight going forward, I can fight backwards. So like I said, everybody will see November 18th that I'm the best fighter in the world.
You haven't exactly said the nicest things about Roy Jones in private. It is well known in the sport that you don't think a great deal of him personally. Exactly what is it you dislike about Roy?
Well, like I said, he stepped up to challenge me. Anybody challenge me, got to get dogged out. That's my job. You know, I'm not going to say, if somebody challenges me, going to say, oh, he's a nice guy and all that. I'm not going to do that. A man challenging me, he's going to get dogged out.
What about you, Roy? Anybody who come into the ring against you got to get dogged out too?
Nah, you don't got to get dogged out. You just got to get taught a lesson.
How you going to teach him a lesson? Tell us what's going to happen in the fight.
That's all I can do. I got to go out there and do what I got to do to teach that lesson.
You can't. Can nobody teach me a lesson? I'm the teacher, baby. I'm the teacher.
See. We'll see come to 18.
I'm breaking you up.
We'll see come to 18.
I'm breaking you up.
We'll see come to 18.
That's all I got to say. Breaking you.
We'll
Baby,
see come to 18.
fight.
I'm your huckleberry. That's just what I'm looking for.
Get your
That's
track
just
shoes
my
on.
game. That's
Get your
just
track
my
shoes
game.
on, boy.
That's just my game.
I'm knocking your punk ass out.
All right, gentlemen.
I'm your huckleberry.
We understand.
Bring it on.
I'm going to shoot you down.
Bring it on.
All right. We hear you. Thanks very much, Roy Jones Jr. and James Toney. We appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to the hostilities, and they will be, trust me, genuine hostilities on the night of November 18, pay-per-view from here at the MGM Grand.
He's a bad man, isn't he, Mike? James Toney. I mean, Roy's obviously bad in his own way, but he never changed after this fight, did he? He was always never knew what he was going to do.
What you see is what you get with James, and he's one of those guys, I think, that if you didn't have a certain level of mental resilience, I think Toney could really get under your skin and break you in the lead up to a contest. But Roy was seeming to thrive with all of the pressure there and all of the talk that he's going to hunt him down. And then I think Roy's plan going into this bout was to try and frustrate James to get him tight where he could maybe control the bout off the outside. So I thought that was perfect because it surmises both of their natural temperaments of how they fight and the kind of people that they were.
And who can forget, Tassie, that Danny Green actually sparred James Toney at the wild card, and he was going out to the card to get his gun at one stage. So, again, that's the size him up.
Yeah, I had a few boys that were there of the team, Fennick and that, and I heard all about that. Mate, just great to see two legends like you said, Lyndon, like two and 3 pound for pound. You know, I'm obsessed with the 90s boxing, as we all know. These two, just amazing fighters. And if you're talking boxing, you've got to talk to these two guys. Any era, hold their own with anyone. Unbelievable.
Well, going into the fight, both were undefeated. Toney was 44-0-2, so I didn't actually realise he'd had that amount of fights when he fought Roy. He had 29 knockouts in there. Jones was 26-0 with 23 KOs. So, Mike, they set the stage really well. Two genuine superstars, and this is the era where these great fighters fought each other regularly.
Like you just said it. I mean, why this was so exciting for fight fans was that Roy was stepping up a weight class, but Toney had just the previous year stepped up from middleweight himself because he was having troubles making weight. You know, Toney, you talk about the numbers he amassed. He was managed by Jackie Callan, and they subscribed to the theory that it was better to keep him active than to constantly be resetting for camp and be needing to undertake sparring and conditioning for 6 to 8 weeks. So Toney was pretty much fighting every other month in non-title bouts, even when he was champion, hence why his record continued to build. But in terms of, like you said, the axes of two guys meeting, this was the best fight of 1994 in terms of the most anticipated between pound-for-pound operators. And I think that when you look at both guys coming in, there's no excuses. If it had been at 160, might have been a bit of excuses that Tony was struggling with the weight or whatever it was. Jones at that time, Jones started 154, built to 160. I think this contest was a natural timing for him to move up in weight, but that was the slight question mark going in, was just would that 8 pounds size difference technically be significant in the belt or not?
Well, I'll start the vision here. We'll keep talking as we go, but this is, as you said, Mike, 1994 was November 18th at the MGM Grand Garden and Casino for the IBF Super Middleweight Championship of the World. So we'll get the fight rolling here. And geez, Tassie, these guys both obviously ended up coming to Australia in different parts of their career, but this is when they're both at the peak. They cut a lot different figures to the two that ended up coming to Australia and fighting Danny Green and Lucas Brown, respectively.
Yeah, look, it is what it is. We don't worry about that stuff. I mean, so many fighters hang on. Ali got beat by Trevor Burbick, and fucking Tyson got beat by every bum you can think of. We don't worry about that, Lyndon. We worry about when they're at their peak. All fighters hang on too long for extra money, and we can't blame them because, if we got offered a few mil, we'd do it too, Lyndon. So, at the end of the day, let's just talk about guys in their prime. I don't care who come to Australia. They weren't counted. To me, it didn't even happen.
Yep. Yeah. So, Mike, we're into the first round here. What were your sort of thoughts watching this, how the fight was going to pan out?
Well, this is actually one of the bouts I happened to watch live and watched it with my father at the time. And I remember my father just saying that Tony was struggling to cope with Roy's speed and angles. And you've seen a little bit of that in these highlights here where Roy's able to land 2-3 shots and then get out the way of the counter. And as we approach round 3, you'll see that kind of early rhythm be highlighted in I guess, Tony trying to mimic Roy and it backfiring a little bit.
Yeah, Tassie.
Yeah, it wasn't that. That was a bit of a, the knockdown. I mean, it's a bit of a bump and a bit of a lost his balance, but I mean, he got sucking into it.
Tassie, he did. Look, Roy Jones had a habit of that, of course, but he did make Tony look slow, didn't he? And I never thought I'd sort of say that about James Toney, but as I said, he's not the first and last fighter that he did that to. But right from the word go, he looked a little bit lethargic. Did you think the weight cut might have had a little bit to do with that?
Mate, don't sort of put shade on Roy's greatness. But it's just his hands. It's just too fast, mate. Like, both great fighters, but I mean, Roy's hand speed, punches in bunches. This Roy Jones, can beat anyone ever. Like, James Toney's a legend. We love him, but mate, it's just the way it is. Like, Roy's just too quick for these guys. He's too quick for a James Toney, and he's too quick for a Bernard Hopkins. Like back then, not when he gets older. This Roy Jones makes everyone look stupid.
Well, it was very similar, wasn't it, Mike, to the Bernard Hopkins fight? Because we obviously back then...
Only he hurt his hand.
Yeah.
And he fought one hand, though, against Hopkins.
Yeah, but back then, of course, we didn't know the legend that Hopkins was going to become as well. Back then, we sort of saw it as a bit of a coming-out party for Roy Jones to get his world title. But similar to this fight, he just made it look easy from the opening bell, didn't he?
I think one of the downsides of, I guess, what they call the shell defense that James Toney had is that so much of your weight is balanced on your rear foot, and it's predicated on your opponent stepping into your wheelhouse and throwing. And Roy was just too fast and too sharp for it. And when it come to a time where Toney had to start needing to walk Roy down, he just couldn't find them. And there's no shame in that because, like Taz said, I mean, this version of Roy Jones, you could place him in any era throughout the history of the sport and probably consider him favourite against his counterpart. There's fighters that are considered greater fighters historically, but in terms of pound-for-pound talent on a particular night, this version of Roy Jones and what we would see for the better part of the next decade is near untouchable when you look at boxing history.
So this Roy Jones, we had it on once, Lyndon. This Roy Jones beats Hagler too quick.
Yeah, well,
you got to
go ahead.
You got to really talk Sugar Ray Robertson and that beating this Jones.
Do you think
there's not many?
Well, this is obviously him at super middleweight. Do we judge him better at middleweight, or do you think this was his ideal weight, or even light heavyweight?
That's what I said to Mike before.
I think, yeah, I think super middleweight was his best weight. At light heavyweight, he got knocked down by Lou Duval. You know, someone like, he had tough fights with Richard Hall till he found his range, Derek Harmon till he found his range, Eric Harding. Just, that doesn't, at super middleweight, that doesn't happen. He stops those guys in 5 or 6 rounds. Once he gets into rhythm, he breaks them down. You know, so he just kind of lost a little bit of that speed and that rhythm when he went up in weight. I think this night here, when you look at everything he's doing, I'm not saying that how he fights is textbook, because James Toney was more textbook than Roy, but this is unprecedented kind of athleticism. When you look at the way he's just turning at angles and that, I mean, how does James Toney go into camp and prepare for that?
Well, I think that's, or what do you think, Tassie? I was just going to say, I think it's almost one of his strengths that he's predictably unpredictable. You know, he leads with his left, he leads with his right, he leads with a hook, he leads with an uppercut, and he's off to the side and he's hitting you again. So he's just one of those unique fighters that just comes around once in a life, or once in a generation.
Yeah, 100%. You don't teach someone to fight like Roy Jones. He's not a guy that you'll teach your boxers to immunise like Prince Azim Hamed. They're just freaks. You know what I mean? Yeah, they're not textbook. I mean, I love Jorge Linares, like someone who I think does everything beautifully. Roy Jones and Nazim Hamed, they just get it done, but you don't teach anyone to be like them because it's impossible. You can't leap in with 5 left hooks in a row and a leaping uppercut. It's just insane.
Yeah. Well, you know, as I said before, Mike, it's a very unique type of fighter that makes great fighters look ordinary, and that's what Roy Jones had a habit of doing, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see here, this actually, round 8 was one of Tony's better rounds. It was probably, I think it was either the 5th or the 6th and the 8th, which were 2 of his stronger rounds. And even those rounds were pretty tight, and it just seemed like Roy was just having a rest, which in fights ebb and flow. But yeah, I mean, when you watch James Toney in these highlights, you wouldn't think he was 44-0-2 and ranked higher on a pound-for-pound list. Yeah. And that's not to discredit him. It's just to reflect how great Roy was on this particular night.
Yeah, he's certainly got all the tools, hasn't he, Tassie? He's just, as I said to Mike, he just made great fighters look ordinary. And you can just see here, everything's on his own terms. He fights when he wants to fight. He rests when he wants to rest. He's just, it was just a masterclass.
Unbelievable,
look at that
unbelievable.
movement even there. Yep. Like, look at that, backed up to the ropes. You would think that that's precisely where you want him, but he finds a way to escape.
Yep.
And Mike, like, I think Peter was the only one that had him in our top 10 pound for pound of all time. I wanted to, but it's sort of hard. But as good as what he was, Roy. I mean, Mike, like, what argument would you make for him? Because he was so good and was so dominant. You know,
well, it's almost on potential, and it's on the dominance of weight classes that maybe other contenders or top tier contenders weren't established because Roy was dismantling them with such ease. So it's easy to say, like, it's similar to, you know, Tyson. We talk about Tyson, that he didn't have enough significance in his run, but how do you know that Terrell Biggs wouldn't have been a heavyweight world champion if he wasn't crushed by Tyson how he
Tony
was?
Tucker. Yep.
And Roy, to a greater extent than Tyson, there was endless fighters like that. They looked great on the way up. Eric Harding's one. After Roy stopped him late, he was never really the same fighter again. He took all of the confidence out of most of the guys he beat, especially the top contenders. I mean, but I still think that there's a depth in his record to make an argument he's top 10. He beat, like I said earlier, Malinga, Jorge Castro, James Toney, Bernard Hopkins, Eric Luca.
Virgil
There's
Hill.
about, Virgil Hill, but like outside of McCallum, that's 6 future world champions I just mentioned there. So you can't say that he was fighting guys handpicked or that, because all those guys went on to win versions of the world title. John Ruiz and heavyweight, another one, 7.
Yep.
And I'm massive.
It's unbelievable
with the
when
guys
you
that
look at
go
it like
on
that.
and win titles after.
And let's not forget when the first fight with Antonio Tarver, he made him look pretty ordinary as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is with Roy that kind of tarnished his legacy was that he went up to heavyweight, took the muscle down, come to light heavy, beat Tarver the first fight, but realistically, he was never the same fighter again. And outside of the DQ loss to Montel Griffin, every loss in his career, some staggeringly bad knockout losses, all came not just post-prime, but when he was at the absolute end.
That's the thing.
If he retired after Ruiz, is there a bigger argument that he makes the top 10 of all time, Mike?
Here's a sad part. If he retired after Ruiz, similar to how people talk about Floyd Mayweather now, everyone will be talking about Roy and Floyd in this generation as the two greatest fighters of all time. That's a reality.
Yeah, well, after this fight, of course, he did want to go up and fight Ruiz. I think he was 193 pound, which is 90 kilos, I'm assuming, about 90, and he had to go back down to light heavyweight. So what's that?
87 and a half.
Yeah, so it's at 18 pound he had to lose. It's a lot of weight, and he did it. I think it was only 6 months later, whatever it was. That's a massive amount of weight for him to lose. And like you said, Mike, he had the disqualification loss to Montel Griffin, redeemed himself, of course, in a rematch in a 1-round KO. He had the win over Virgil Hill. Then obviously the fights with Antonio Tarver. So, and then you're right. I think everything sort of started to catch up with him after that because he obviously had the knockout loss to Glenn Johnson, the Tarver decision as well. And then he did come back and beat Felix Trinidad, though, I've got to say, even though Trinidad was obviously way past his peak. And then, of course, he had 3 losses, Joe Calzaghe, Danny Green, and Bernard Hopkins. But
very big weight for Trinidad.
Yeah.
Like,
2008.
very heavy for Trinidad.
Yeah, well, it's 14 years after this fight, so geez, it would have been great to happen at the time. But, Mike, do you think his legacy is tarnished a little bit by a lot of those late career losses? You just said if he hadn't have done it if he had retired like...
Right now it is.
Yeah.
Right now it is. It won't be. In 20 years' time, it won't be. Similar to Sugar Ray Robinson.
Yeah.
Sugar Ray Robinson, majority of his careers came post-prime or at the absolute end. And not that it should affect how you measure someone, because you should measure someone by the run of their prime and then the accomplishments post-prime rather than the deterioration post-prime. But a lot of people judge Robinson for it, and then history has a kind way of treating fighters. Look at Ali.
Yeah.
Ali, when he come off the loss to Holmes and Burbick, probably that 5-year period thereafter, no one was saying he was the greatest heavyweight of all time. But you give it a passage of time, and then people look at it through a new lens. And I think with Roy, give it another 10, 15 years where the next generation start looking back at highlights and looking at the footage. And the footage doesn't lie. He's one of the greatest fighters ever.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, he retired, we'll say. Who knows if he's retired for good, apart from the Mike Tyson exhibition. He retired in 2018 with a 66-9 record with 47 KOs. We didn't probably go into too much about what Tony did after this. He also fought, I think, a couple of times for the heavyweight title. He had a no decision with John Ruiz for the WBA title.
Well, he won the bout. Yeah, he won the bout, but failed the steroids test.
That's right, he did. So it was 05. Hasim Raham, he drew with him, and then it was 06 as well, and then had another no contest in 08. So what happened there, Mike? That was only went 3 rounds. So was that another drug test, or that was something else?
Which one was that with Ruckman?
The Raham fight. So he drew with him in 06, and then in 2008,
head clash.
No contest.
Yeah, head clash.
Oh, head clash.
What about Samuel Peters?
Yeah, he fought him twice. First fight was tight as well.
Lost to him twice, yep. So in 06, 07. As we said, we won't mention the Lucas Brand fight in 2013. But he retired in 2017 after a knockout of Mike Shepherd. So look, 2 great fighters. I love when you pick these 90s fights, guys, because it really gives us a chance to go back. And I'm with you, Tassie. The 90s and to some extent the 80s rocked as far as boxing goes.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're talking boxing, I mean, we talk all boxing, but, I mean, Duran Hagler, Leonard Hearns era, and then even Mike McCallum and Donald Curry, but look, for my era, the peak time for me, Chavez, Whitaker,
Yeah.
Mildred Taylor, Terry Norris, Roy Jones, Oscar De La Hoya,
Tyson was doing his
James
thing.
Toney.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. No,
every fight, every pub. And, don't forget, remember Don King shows, Mike, how many title fights? They're 10 title fights. You'd have Michael Cova, Harpooner, Whitaker, Chavez, Tyson, all in the one card, 10 world title fights.
Yeah. Yep, they don't make them like that anymore.
Well, it was a different era. I think we have more volume nowadays, but the product's more diluted. Whereas then, say back then on main TV, which now would consider DAZN, ESPN, etc. Back then, HBO Showtime, you might only have 30 dates a year. Now you've got 70.
Yeah.
But on 10 of those 30 shows, there would be something like that Don King extravaganza, 3-4 world title fights at a minimum, sometimes up to 5 and then another 2 off TV. And it was absolute magic when it worked. Whereas now I just think it's probably better for boxing in general that there's more outlets, but the product's a lot more diluted when it's presented.
Yeah.
100%.
Agree. And the fans of today don't realise probably how much better we had it back in the day. In my opinion,
They've got no idea. They don't know shit. They've no idea.
That's what I'm saying.
No idea.
You can have the DAZN for $3 a month. I'll take HBO and at any time of the week. So end of the day, the final scores were 119, 108 for Jones, 118, 109 for Jones, and 117, 110 for Jones. So a pretty comprehensive fight. But I think when we say or define classic, it's more than just the fight itself. It's actually the circumstances and where the guys are in their careers and everything else. So great pick, Tassie. Well, since you're gone next week, Mike, I'm actually going to step up and decide the next one, and we'll wait for you to get back, and we'll give you a few more ones. I'm actually going to go for a fight I'm surprised we haven't had yet. It's the first Sugar Ray Leonard Roberto Duran fight, 1980 in Montreal, Canada. Talk about the ultimate grudge match. I think that was it. So that's going to be the classic fight for next week. And Mike, when you get back when are you back? 6 months' time? 3 months' time?
About 2 months. But like I said, I'll do my utmost to check in occasionally from the road.
We're going to give you every second week or something. We might give you in so you can catch up. So we'll do that with the dream fights as well. We've got a lot to catch up on. So if you are out there watching and you like what we're doing, make sure you maybe suggest a fight. Happy to take a request. Make sure you do all the stuff, like, share, subscribe, all those things. And look forward to seeing you next week. So, Mike, all the very best for your travels, mate. Can't wait to see what happens with the world of Pro Bellum. And Tassie, as always, mate, we'll see you on Thursday.
All the best, Mikey.
See you, mate.
Thanks, guys.